Um, the Republican Party's assault on the American democracy is an imminent existential crisis, but this disaster was long in the making. Now, for the past 50 years, the Republican Party, by and large, and the larger conservative movement have moved farther and farther to the right, and they have become increasingly anti democratic and detached from all reality. Today's Republican Party is a de facto fascist political organization, but that is only the logical end result of more than 50 years of not having any policies and planning in place. The Republican Party embraced white supremacy and white backlash back in the 1960s in the form of the Southern Strategy as a way to win over white voters that were angry about the victories of the civil rights movement. It then enthusiastically chose the friendly fascism of Ronald Reagan and the gangster capitalism and right wing libertarianism of the 1980s and beyond as an aspirational template. It has grown ever closer to white evangelical Christianity and ultimately to its most extreme factions, Christian nationalism and dominionism. See, the thing is, if you're a Christian, you can't support Trump. You can't support Trump and be a Christian. So that's just not how it works. Republicans have also operated in concert with foe and the larger right wing echo chamber where the most extreme and dangerous elements of the right gained increasingly visibility and power over the direction of the conservative movement. As a practical matter, the groups that Hillary Clinton called a basket of deplorables had gained immense influence over the Repug Party. Conspiracism, hostility to truth and reason, a rejection of empirical reality, and an embrace of the cult-like thinking have been long-standing traits on the American Repug side since the early 1960s. Now, ultimately, the Republican Party's embrace of fascism is a story about how respectable establishment conservatives made bargains and agreements with fringe factions in order to win elections and hold power. Gradually, those supposedly mainstream repugs have gave the political arsonists in their midst the fuel and matches, and then feigned shock and support at the resulting conflagration. In the years since Donald Trump's seizure of the Republican Party, some of those respectable conservatives have chosen to break away from that particular party, but one can certainly question their past records and current motivations. But in many cases, this has demanded great personal and political courage, and there's no denying that those who want to save democracy need as many allies as they can get, irrespective of any of their ideological differences. Now a few of those conservatives have only been willing to reckon honesty with their role in creating and empowering the present day fascist movement. The temptation to whitewash recent history and present themselves in a noble light can be too much to resist. About a year ago, Bill Kristol had wrote last September that it was time to face the facts. Real existing conservatism as it exists in America in 2020 is an accomplice to an apologist for and an enabler of Trump's nativist, populist, unconservative, and authoritarianism. But Bill Kristol is still eager to embrace the conservative movement of the 1980s and to deny its clear connection to what we face now. um, recently, um, recently, Chauncey DeVega had sat. Um, Basically, Chauncey DeVega had a long conversation with former Republican Congressman Joe Walsh, who was a staunch conservative, a leading voice in the Tea Party movement, and a boisterous opponent of Barack Obama. At first, he openly supported Trump before turning against him in a dramatic fashion. He even ran against Trump very briefly and with no success in the 2020 presidential campaign. He has a new podcast out called White Flag with Joel Walsh, where, in his words, he surrenders the urge to fight and strives to find a path to unite the country but not divide it. In this conversation, Walsh warns that Democrats and progressives still do not understand the depth of loyalty and power that Donald Trump has over the Republican Party, which is kind of funny because Trump shows no loyalty to anybody. He shares what it was like to be inside Trump world at the highest levels and explains how and why Trump's coup attempt and the January 6th insurrection have become normalized, if not outright embraced, by Trump sycophants. Trump sycophants, Walsh warns, are willing to destroy American society to get their way, and their opponents must take that threat more seriously if democracy is to survive. Um, Basically, there is some questions and answers here from it. So basically, Chauncey Domega had asked Joe Walsh, how are you managing your emotions in this time of crisis? Basically, he says we are in a unique moment in the country's history where we are trying to save our country's democracy. If you're in the battle every day, it is exhausting, and I would argue that most of us should feel that same way. Also, emails basically almost every day from people who read the articles or listen to the podcast. Hold on a second here. Basically, there is a consistent theme. We are tired. We are afraid. Please help. Tell us what we can do. I tell them that the fight hasn't begun yet, but how do we support people who are already tired before the fight has fully begun? We are in a weird position here. Basically, Joe Walsh was part of Trump world. He was part of the Trump cult, and he got out of it, which is actually good for him. But whenever he has the opportunity, he says we try to wake up the Democrats and anybody else who will listen to what the people in the Trump world and who are part of that movement are really all about and what we're really up against. I do not believe that most Democrats and independents really believe it when they say we have to defend our democracy, but they do not really understand how close we are right now to losing it all. Basically, as Joel Walsh said, he was part of Trump world. But what do people outside that world not understand about it? People watching MSNBC or CNN every night hear Rachel Maddow and everybody else bemoaning what's going on. But what you have there is a bunch of Democrats and other good people just talking to each other. They're not really seeing what's going on in this country, and this is a battle, and a fight for the heart, and solve the country, and it's a life or death thing. Too many of these Democrats and CNN and MSNBC and establishment Democratic types are not paying attention to what the other side is doing, but you need to understand how your enemy is going to work. Um, and we hear from thousands of Republican voters every single day. If there's one message that I try to convey to the MSNBC viewers of the world, it is the following: these people, the Trump sycophants, the Repug voters of today, they would happily burn this country down to get the country they want, and they would happily do it. And they tell me that. I don't think the folks who watch CNN and MSNBC every night really understand that fact. And this is an echo chamber effect among the Democrats. And progressives, the NPR and MSNBC types. They refuse to accept that the people living in Trump world and the maggot universe really believe what they're being told. And these Trumpists don't think they're sick, but they are. And they don't think they're confused, which they are. And they don't think they're lost, which they are. They think that you folks, Democrats, are the sick and confused ones, which they're not. The maggot world is the real world to them, and all your interventions will not help them. And what do people in the maggot world tell us? That they're not nuts, which they are. All the good New York Democratic types, the elites, I will call them, they just laugh and think all these people are nuts and that they are all bigots, and they are not. They're dead set. They're dead set on what they want to do to the country. And their country, they believe their 1953 America has been taken away from them in the form of the squatter Donald Trump. They think that he's going to bring it back step by step, which he didn't, and he won't. These Trump sycophants are taking the long view. The MSNBC crowd does not understand that fact at all. And what is the role of race and racism? What is the role of race and racism in their version of the good old days? It is a broader and more general view, and there's no doubt that race is part of it. And let's be honest, who the fuck are we even talking about? This was my family. These were my supporters. We're talking about old white men and old white women, and that is the Republican Party base. These people are talking about a life where the factory that you worked at, um, right there is now that was here in town is now gone, and this was a world where men, this is there is this was a world where men married women and women married men, and that's gone now. There is the stupid stuff too, such as their belief that back then they could freely say Merry Christmas. In their eyes now, it's going to be a struggle. I hear this stuff all the time. The country had borders, and nobody could come into this country illegally. But in their minds, that's all gone. Now, some of this is an issue of race, where they long for a time when their minds, when their where in their minds, white people had reigned supreme. But as we see it, mostly what they want back is just a time, where for them there was a right and wrong and now everything's just gray. In the last 20 years, the world has changed so quickly. Trump basically just said, I'm going to stop it. I'll stop all of this spinning. Um, he says, I'll build a wall, which he didn't. I'll keep brown and black people out, and that was it. It was over once Donald Trump said that. And what did it feel like? What did it feel like being inside the Trump world and the maggot universe? You felt a struggle every day. Basically, Joe Walsh was a Republican, um, and he was a former Republican congressman. Um, the pedophile cover upper Jim Jordan and him were best and Joel Walsh were best friends. Never make friends with a pedophile. Mark Meadows and I were good. And Mark Meadows and him and Joel Walsh were good friends. He was on 200 different radio stations around the country. He was going to be the next Rush Limbaugh. In that world, you've got these older white men and older white women listening to you. You're incentivized and you're pressured. Now, how did Trump take over the Republican Party? Um, Basically, he was asked that all the time. And what Trump did was he realized that the Republican Party establishment ignored everything. And they were all these people who wanted to bring back 1953 America instead of sitting them down and educating them and telling them, you're never going to get 1953 back. This is what John McCain, Boner, and the party's leadership ignored these people's concerns. And then, being fair, in the 2010 Tea Party, um, basically, and the people Joe Walsh came along and inflamed that base. We riled them up. I was in that world every day. The more you can rile them up, the better. And those people were primed by the time the demagogue came along. We condemn everything that Trump and the Republican fascists represent, but to see this happen in front of our very eyes, and to be in a moment in history where so many forces, evil as they are coming together, is exhilarating in a way. It's like a car accident in slow motion. But this is a fulcrum in America and world history. It must be so intoxicating for the Trumpists and neo-fascists, but most people on the Democratic side are afraid to take on that emotional component. Um, Instead, they delude themselves into believing that reason and facts will stop this. We are living in a populist moment in American history. Basically, I didn't vote for Trump in 2016 because he's a piece of shit. Basically, Joe Walsh said he didn't love him and he didn't like him, but he had been preaching this since he was in Congress. Our political system fucking sucks. Um, the Democrats and Republicans both fucking suck. They're both broken. We needed a disruption, so along came a disruptor, Trump, who was installed by Russia in 2016. He claimed he was going to join the swap, which he didn't. And there was a part of Joe Walsh that recognized our political system needed, figuratively speaking, some blowing up. Donald Trump is a horrible piece of shit. He's an evil piece of shit. But there are good disruptors and bad disruptors. The Democrats in 2016, and basically Joe Walsh would argue today, we had no clue that we were in a populist moment. But if the Democrats had nominated Bernie Sanders in 2016, he would have beat Trump. Instead, they nominated the poster child for the establishment, Hillary Clinton. The only reason Biden won is because the country was exhausted with Trump, and we're still in the populist moment. And to your point, if I had $10,000 to bet right now, I would put it all on Trump. Well, technically I wouldn't, but Joe Walsh would. He's the favorite in 2024 because the Democrats still don't recognize what this moment is. What does it feel like to have the power you possessed at least for a while? When you go on the radio every day, or you go on Foe every night, what you say can really move people to do the things. Again, this is something unique to conservatives and Republicans. Rush was a pro and a master. Yeah, and a piece of shit too. And we on the right dominate. The Republicans dominate the talk radio, which they kind of do, because almost every time you look for a podcast, it's always about right wing shit. And there's much more of a direct contact and intimacy on the right, and how their demagogues and celebrities and talkers and politicians talk to the people. I don't think the Democrats have the equivalency for that. There's an elite aspect to the Democratic Party. Republican and conservative leadership know that Trump's a fucking fraud, and that he's a grifter basically. But they play the parts well, and they come across like they're one of the people. And there is enormous power doing what I did. It is very difficult to do the right thing, but it's much easier to lie and inflame your listeners. And that's what Sean Hannity and the rest of them have made their livings doing. I couldn't do that because eventually I could only speak my truth, and my truth is that Donald Trump is an evil, horrible piece of shit. So eventually I had to say that, and then I lost everything. Now, is it just about money? How do these people choose between power and the truth, and do they have any higher principles beyond immediate gains? Some people believe in the cause, but most do not. It's analogous to the other world I come from, Congress. Basically, Joe Walsh said that most Republicans in Congress probably believe that Trump is bad, and he's bad for the party, which he is. He's bad for the country. They don't say it. They don't say it, but it's all utilitarian, and they want to get reelected, so they don't want to chance it by saying he's evil. Some people do believe it. And there are true believers in the Republican conference. In the conservative media world, most people don't believe it, but some do. And the reason you sell your soul, and I couldn't do it, is that, man, the money is good, the recognition is great, the power is awesome, the ratings are through the roof, but it's really hard to walk away from. Being in Congress, um, but being in Congress is awesome, and the ratings are through the roof with that, and it's hard to walk away from. But they decided I'm going to keep my mouth shut when it comes to Trump because I want to get reelected. I get that. They told me that night after night, day after day, it's a hard thing to walk away from. And why are so many people in this country, especially among the political class and the media, are afraid to call Trump and the larger neo-fascist movement evil? Um, as left wing as MSNBC is and may be, as a little left of the center as CNN might be, there's still corporate media pressure not to use the language that someone like me uses. Um, when I call Trump a piece of shit, an evil piece of shit, I'll get well-known Democrats coming down on me to tone it down. But when I call Trump a piece of shit traitor or a killer because of the COVID pandemic, the grassroots Democrats love it. But the Democratic Party establishment and the media class shy away from that kind of language. Is it just about money and ad revenue, or is it just a fear of a backlash? They're all part of the same club, and why the hell was Chris Christie on your TV every minute of the day the very last few weeks selling a book that nobody reads? Because he's part of the club. Chris Christie has no constituency out there, but he's part of the ABC, CBS, NBC, New York City, Washington, D.C. club. When Joe Walsh was in Congress, he felt it. I was never part of that club because I went there and railed against the Republicans and Democrats. And in D.C., the lobbyist class and the media class is a very bipartisan group. But in the end, we suppose that there is a worry that my type of plain talking is going to turn off the advertisers. So basically, in the mainstream media, especially the professional centrist types, are afraid to rise to the occasion, and they're terrified of what we would demand of them. Now, right after the Klan insurrection, the day of, and for a few days after that, there was a lot of people on the radio talking to Republican-based voters, and for the first time we heard them say, "Oh my fucking God, this isn't good." I even heard some people that they were afraid and that they were fearing everything that was going on. But as the days went by and the weeks went by, and now the months went by, and now we're a year later from the Klan insurrection that happened. The average Republican voter now says January 6th was no big deal, which it was. I felt the same thing from the news media. Oh my fucking God, this is happening when January 6th took place, but now a year later, it's all part of the Washington political ratings grab, and they don't talk about what it really was. But I believe that they're afraid to do so. Now, how did Trump world and his sycophants, in particular, respond to the events of January 6th at the time, and where the fuck are they? And where the fuck are they now? And we're talking about cult members. Building up to the 2020 election, Trump started talking about it being stolen months before, which it wasn't. So by the time of Election Day, what we were hearing over and over from these people was absolute distrust of whatever was going to happen that night. They had already bought into the fact that this was not going to be a free and fair election, which it was, and that window of time between Election Day and January 6th started to become afraid of potential violence because of the things we were hearing. When it all went down on January 6th, that was the first time we heard Trump sycophants kind of catch their breath. They were a little bit shaken by it all, I doubt that, because they believed that they were good, which they weren't, and they believed that they were loyal cult sycophants, which they weren't, and that they waited. They wanted to hear what Hannity would say to them. They waited to hear what Tucker Carlson would say to them, and the racist cunt Laura Ingraham and all the rest of the racists from that machine. Then they waited to see what Trump would say. In the weeks following January 6th, the right-wing talkers began blaming Antifa, and that didn't pan out because Antifa wasn't a part of it. So they tried to pin it on the Black Lives Matter, which they weren't a part of it. And then eventually they said it was no big deal, just a few knuckleheads who got out of hand. Then the cult members over the months really just walked up that ledge, and what happened on January 6th was no big deal to them. Now, why? Because they were given that messaging day after day from the Hannitys and others of that world. Did Trump change the Republican Party, or did he just give the modern Republican Party permission to do what it always has been on some level? I think it's the latter on some level, but this had been building up for a while. I saw repeatedly, and I meant it. I'm responsible. Basically, Joe Walsh was responsible for Trump. Stuart Stevens was responsible. Jonah Goldberg is responsible. So was Bill Kristol, Jeb Bush, John McCain, Sean Hannity, every fucking Republican and conservative. And I don't give a fuck if you're another Trumper. But we all created the conditions for this guy to come along in 2015. And all of these principled conservatives and never Trumpers and establishment people and their base had been telling them for years what they were scared of and pissed off about, but the party did nothing but about it. People like Newt Gingrich riled them up, and then the Tea Party people like me, we came along and we riled them up. Trump and his moment were always waiting to happen because the party ignored their base for years instead of sitting the base down, educating them, and teaching them that their 1953 is never fucking coming back. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. And if you want to support my work even further, you can go to the about section on my YouTube channel, and you can donate to Patreon to further support my work. And yeah.